what people are seeing is that Mark Carney, while he made grand promises of change, he's even worse than Justin Trudeau.
Even worse than Justin Trudeau. This program today is the other bookend to yesterday's broadcast about how the mainstream media wants Pierre Poilievre to move to the left. So does Doug Ford and other liberal politicians masquerading as conservatives. When we come back, we'll delve a little deeper into this one.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please like the station. We really appreciate your support. Subscribe if you haven't, and resubscribe if you need to do that too, because YouTube can be very, very bad about that. So that was an interesting comment from Pierre Poilievre. And yesterday, of course, we talked about no left turn. Found one journalist who at least saw the rationale, the reason for Pierre Poilievre not to go leftwards, not to suddenly get real civil with Mark Carney and to stop being a leader of the opposition. This really is the point here, is that Mark Carney and Doug Ford met on Monday when Mark Carney was conspicuous by his absence from the EU summit in Washington with Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not want Carney there because Carney is again flirting with the Swedes over the potential purchase of Swedish fighter jets, the Gripen. This is infuriating Donald Trump because, as Colonel Doug McGregor pointed out on the show the last time he was here, the United States is basically down to two exports that it still has a fairly good grip on. Agriculture is one. It has the most arable land in the world. And the second is, of course, armaments. It sells more arms than any other country, and it still probably has the best in terms of military hardware. And all of the major armaments manufacturers are still based in the United States. They might have lost all their manufacturing that isn't armaments, but companies like Boeing, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, Northrop, they're all in the United States. And they continue to produce fighter jets, bombers, tanks, armored personnel carriers, ships. They're still there producing that. And when Mark Carney says, I think we'll buy from Sweden, Donald Trump doesn't like that. It's also a stupid idea, as I've said, because we can't have two different sets of fighter jets. And this is why Mark Carney doesn't think anything through. But neither does Doug Ford. And I love this picture here of Doug Ford. Isn't that wonderful? There he is with another faux Tory, another red Tory, Tim Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia. And of course, Tim Houston's the Premier who has gone crazy with telling his residents, don't go for a walk in the woods, you might start a fire. And I'm very surprised Doug Ford hasn't followed through with that. But I want to focus for a minute before I get to Doug Ford telling Pierre Poilievre to be co-opted. Before I get to that, and he literally said that, not co-opted, but work with Mark Carney, don't oppose him. Well, I'm sorry, he's the leader of the official opposition. That's his job to oppose him. But we'll get to that in a minute. But one of the biggest stories that came out yesterday, of course, and I think for the week, so many people are commenting on this. It's the homeowner in Lindsay who was charged by police for daring to use force against a home invader, an intruder, somebody who invaded his property, potentially hurting himself or other members in the household. Now, as I discussed last night on the Conservative Corner, I do think we need castle law in this country where people are authorized to use whatever force is necessary to subdue and remove home intruders. I don't care if people think that's radical or too American or US style. We've all had enough of this because Doug Ford is posturing here. And let's watch this. And I've got a lot to say about Doug Ford here.
Hi, my name is Aura. I'm with CBC Hamilton. Premier Ford, what is your response to the news that a 16-year-old boy has been released on bail after murder and attempted murder charges were stayed due to a lack of sufficient evidence in connection to a mass shooting outside of Toronto High School where 2 people died in June 2024?
We should change the Young Offenders Act. I'll tell you one thing. When I was 16, and every person in this room, when they're 16, they're smart enough to know if you grab a gun and start shooting people, shooting the neighborhood up, or shooting people, and you kill them, you should be in jail. That's one thing I got a pet peeve about. You know, the criminal code is controlled by the federal government.
Hold it right there, Doug Ford. The criminal code is controlled by the federal government. So it's all the federal government's fault. There's nothing I can do. This is absolute hogwash. Provinces amend laws, create laws all the time. Doug Ford's government has created many laws. They've amended existing laws. Of course they can do something about this. And we're getting to the crux of the argument. He's talking here about the Young Offenders Act and saying, well, that's a federal issue. Nothing I can do about it. It's just horrible, though. 16-year-olds shooting up neighborhood, torturing people. But wait till he gets to the Lindsay incident. And I really want to highlight the cop-out from Red Tory Doug Ford.
You know, and we have to start holding people accountable. Because these people are, these young kids are running around, and they're kids, 16 to 18 years old.
Let's start holding you accountable, Doug Ford. But that's not what you're about, is it?
Old, breaking into homes. You heard about that one family. 8 people showed up to their home, eight guys, and they pistol whipped the father. The mother had the 1-year-old begging that they don't touch them, ripping the rings off. You know, this is just out of control now here. People have to be held accountable. And then, once I'm on a roll now, did everyone hear about the story in Lindsay? So this criminal that's wanted by the police breaks into this guy's house. This guy gives him a beating, and this guy gets charged. And the other guy gets charged. But, something is broken.
And maybe you're behind it being broken. You're the premier of the province. This is the provincial judicial system you're whining about here. So do something about it, Doug Ford. Stop blaming everybody else. And who's responsible for this? So in Doug Ford's Ontario, yeah, you basically aren't allowed to fight back if somebody comes into your house. And if you do fight back, be careful you don't go too far. Beyond saying, please leave my premises, or I might call the police on you. And the police arrive and what? They arrest the other guy. They arrest the homeowner, not the assailant. This is absolutely ridiculous. But the hypocrisy of Doug Ford is even more ridiculous because he refuses to be held accountable, even though he says, we got to start holding people accountable for this, except don't ask me any difficult questions. And it's all the federal government's fault. There's nothing I can do. And in Doug Ford's Ontario, if you're Chris Barber, the Crown comes after you and wants your truck and then wants to put you in jail for 8 years. If you're Tamara Leach, the Ontario Crown comes after you and wants to put you in jail for 7 years for peaceful protesting. That's what Doug Ford won't address. This is his province. He's the premier. He's the guy who's appointing these judges. And listen to how he describes this judge. I just love this.
Someone breaks into my house or someone else's, you're going to fight for your life. This guy has a weapon. You're going to use any force you possibly can to protect your family. I'm telling you, I know everyone would. I'd be scared to break into Kevon's house. Look at this. He's like a linebacker. He'd beat the living crap out of the guy, as he should. Because enough's enough here. Violence and and breaking into people's homes, putting guns to their heads. And guess what? Some bleeding heart judge.
Boy has been released on bail.
I'd be scared to break into Kevon's house. Look at
So some bleeding heart judge. Did you hear that? Some bleeding heart judge. And you have nothing to do with this bleeding heart judge, do you?
the violence and breaking into people's homes, putting guns to their heads. And guess what? Some bleeding heart judge, little Johnny, he didn't have a good upbringing. So we're going to let him out on bail 5 more times because he's on his 5th, being let out on bail 5 times, just to go do the same thing the next day. I'll tell you one thing, I get more calls than anyone in the country. People are done with this. They're absolutely done. They're finished. You should be able to protect your family. When someone's going in there to harm your family and your kids, you should use all resources you possibly can to protect your family. And maybe these criminals will think twice about breaking into someone's home.
So dig this. People are done with this, Doug Ford says, but there's nothing I can do except throw some red meat to my grassroots supporters who still believe in something called the Ford Nation, who still believe I'm a real conservative, who still believe I care. Doug Ford doesn't care because this is Doug Ford on Wednesday. Let's see what Doug Ford was acting like on Monday this week when he was telling Pierre Poilievre, who would go on that day to win the by-election in Battle River, Crowfoot, with over 80% of the vote. He's telling Pierre Poilievre, lay off Mark Carney. Be a team player. Do whatever Mark Carney tells you to do. Get co-opted. Here's Doug Ford on Monday. Doug Ford, the Liberal.
Today is Pierre Poilievre's by-election. If he gets elected, I'm wondering, what's your advice to him going into the fall sitting of the Parliament?
Work with the Prime Minister.
How's that?
It was Team Canada. Let's put our political stripes aside and start working together collectively on large infrastructure projects, on other areas that he can cooperate with the government.
Last question. Would you have plans to meet with Poilievre?
Hold it. I was wrong. I said he didn't say co-opt. He said cooperate. Same thing. He wants Pierre Poilievre to be co-opted by the Carney government. And he stated that quite clearly and emphatically to reporters there.
Sure that he is working with the Prime Minister?
All I want to do is move forward collectively as a government. I don't care about political stripes. The person I'm working with right now is the Prime Minister of the day. And as far as I'm concerned, he's doing a really, really good job.
He's doing a really, really good job. This is Doug Ford's latest endorsement of Mark Carney. Of course, he did nothing during the federal election campaign to see that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were elected, and he continues to do everything he can to bolster and support Mark Carney and the Liberals. This is what Doug Ford is all about on Monday. On Wednesday, he's outraged over the Young Offenders Act. He's outraged that there's basically no capability in the Ontario province to fight back if you're the victim of a home invasion. He's outraged about that on Wednesday. But on Monday, let's support Mark Carney. And just like the mainstream media, Pierre Poilievre needs to just shut up and put up. And he needs to just listen to what Mark Carney's doing, because Mark Carney's doing a really, really good job. What utter nonsense.
In the position he's been put in, I challenge anyone try to deal with Donald Trump, myself included. He's a different type of cat. But we're united. We know what we need to do. And we know that we need to cut the regulatory burdens off of companies, lower taxes, put money back into people's pockets, support companies that need investment to grow and expand here, and onshore, the procurement side. It's absolutely critical.
So you really think Mark Carney is going to put money back into the pockets of the people, do you? And he's going to lower taxes everywhere. He's the guy who wants, remember, the industrial carbon tax? He's the guy that's pushing business out of the country. Now, before we get to Pierre Poilievre's response to all this yesterday, I want to show you a bit of what's
The cost of
going on?
materials and municipal taxes have decreased. Buyers still aren't biting. And no sales means no shovels in the ground.
There's projects being completed now, but once those projects get completed in 26 and 27, there is going to be a real lack of jobs, lack of investment, lack of a new activity, and lack of delivery of new homes in 28 and 29.
So the private sector is calling Mark Carney on this and saying, we're on the verge of a catastrophe. The housing bubble is going to burst. There's going to be no new construction. This is the private sector telling Carney, it's not going to work. You're headed for disaster. And this is why Mark Carney's not doing a really, really good job.
Despite the Ford government's new law aimed at helping home builders free up cash and fast-track projects, the industry is still calling for more help, asking for provincial and federal tax breaks to lower construction costs.
Those taxes are not paid by our industry. They're passed through to the consumer. And I think the consumer is currently voting with their pocketbook that regardless of the changes in market forces, regardless of some of the adjustments in taxes, price points are still too high. We cannot possibly deliver homes for the price that people are willing to pay.
But provincial officials told Global News any kind of tax holiday isn't under consideration, and tax breaks would be aimed at buyers rather than builders. What the Ford government is looking at is how to work with Ottawa. The federal government has pledged to tap unused public lands to build affordable housing.
We have a lot of surplus land in Ontario, and I think in Ontario alone, over 200 sites. Not all could be available for housing, but let's repurpose that land where we can. Let's repurpose it so we can get affordable housing starts, work with non-for-profits. Let's work for new home buyers. Let's find homes for the missing middle.
But the government also says it wants to give its latest housing policies at least 1 to 2 years to understand its impact before making any additional changes. At Queen's Park, Colin DeMello, Global News.
So how bad are things in Canada? This says it all, thanks to Table Salt, who does some fantastic research. Canada lost 39,000 private sector and 5,800 self-employed jobs in July. Of course, it added 4,000 more public sector jobs. Who was prime minister in July? Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't Justin Trudeau. It was Mark Carney. There are now 4.5 million public sector workers in Canada. There are more public sector workers in Canada than there are in any private sector niche, if you will, or any sector of people working privately. We'll put it that way. In other words, there's more public servants than there are people working in the oil and gas, working in agriculture, working in sales, working in retail, working in the private sector. We're not quite communist yet, but we're getting there at a rapid rate. I mean, look at these figures. Private sector employees are down to 39%. And it is absolutely astounding. This is where this country is going. Canada now has 4.5 million public servants. And I use the word servant begrudgingly because most of these people will never see themselves as a servant to the public. They see themselves as very entitled, deserving of the highest wages that they would never receive in the private sector. The highest job security, the strongest job security that they would never get in the private sector. And get this, these public sector workers have wages. They're being paid by only 13.7 million private sector workers. That's getting to a very, very dangerous ratio. That's like literally 1/3. Public sector workers are 1/3 of private sector workforce. 3 taxpayers for every 1 public service making to $120,000 a year. How is this country still standing? But I thought Mark Carney was doing a really, really good job. Apparently not. Canada's employment rate continues to fall, now sitting at a 26-year low. Public sector employment is at a 30-year high. This cannot continue. It's going to crash. The federal tax take as a percentage of GDP is at a 20-year high, and our tax base is being hollowed out. This is not going to end well. Thank you for Richard Dias for that illustration. No, it's not going to last. It is a recipe for disaster. But Doug Ford says Mark Carney's doing a really, really good job. Seems to me there's a disconnect here someplace. And here's one from my good friend Mark Nixon. Latest data shows building permits are collapsing, down minus 4.3% residential and minus 15% non-residential. Canada is forecasting 3 straight years of declining construction completions. Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation reports we are being gaslit nonstop, not just by Mark Carney. And you know what net zero means for Mark Carney? It's more than just an environmental obsession. It means he has zero to deliver. He can't deliver on jobs. He can't deliver on tariffs. He can't deliver on foreign policy. He can't deliver on the debt and the deficit. He can't deliver on anything except failure. Oh, but Doug Ford says he's doing a really, really good job. Thanks for the clarification. This is from Grok. The Global News report warrants a potential 40,000 direct home building jobs and 30,000 supply chain jobs at risk in Ontario if sales stay low. Not a 40 to 50% national figure, and not from BMO. StatCan reports a 1.3% construction drop in July, with forecasts varying. Example, 2.6% growth per some analyses, declines in starts per others. So that's really neither here nor there. But I want to get to Pierre Poilievre's response to all this, because he recognizes that Mark Carney is more dangerous than Justin Trudeau. He recognizes that the Conservative Party of Canada cannot be co-opted by the Liberal Party and the Carney government. It needs to be exactly what it is, the official opposition. It needs to oppose Carney's overreach, and it needs to propose better policies. This is what Poilievre has been saying. Doug Ford is describing a country where we're all on the same team. Well, that's exactly what happened in Soviet Russia and in Germany during the 1930s and in any dictatorship. We're all on the same team. They're all on the same team. It's called a one-party state. This is what I've been saying from day one of the Carney regime. He wants to co-opt the opposition. He wants a one-party state. That's what Mark Carney is all about. And clearly, the longer he stays in there, the more he talks that way. And Doug Ford is on the Carney team. It's not Team Canada, it's Team Carney. And Doug Ford is part of the problem. Let's listen to what Pierre Poilievre has to say about this.
Is that Mark Carney, while he made grand promises of change, he's even worse than Justin Trudeau.
Yes, even worse.
This is just one of the many examples of the 330% increase in extortion-related crimes since Liberals lowered the penalty for extortion. They removed mandatory prison sentences for extortion with a gun. No wonder crime is raging out of control. Crime, costs, immigration, housing prices are all out of control after 10 years of Liberals, and Mark Carney promised to be different. Instead, everything is worse. The deficit is worse under Carney than it was under Trudeau. The crime is rising under Mark Carney. Our economy is falling, with $60 billion of net investment fleeing our country since he became Prime Minister. Not a single new pipeline, so not a single new proposal for an LNG plant or nuclear plant or port expansion has been made since Mark Carney took office, promising that he was going to reverse weak liberal economic policies. In fact, he has given a gift to President Trump as $60 billion of Canadian investment has fled the country in less than the half a year since Mr. Carney took office. And speaking of trade, he promised he could handle Trump. He said that he could negotiate a winning deal. So far, American tariffs have doubled on Canada, and we're now losing a trade war with China, which is hammering our farmers and fish harvesters. As Mark Carney fails abroad, Canadians pay the price here at home. And nowhere is this more true than in the area of crime and chaos. Mark Carney has not only failed to change a single Liberal law he sent his MPs home for the summer with crime up, inflation up, the deficit up, and elbows down, and not a one action taken to reverse the Liberal crime chaos that we came to expect under his predecessor. And he put in charge of crime his two most incompetent ministers. First, he's got Sean Fraser as the Justice Minister. This is the immigration minister who caused the immigration crisis, and the housing minister who caused the housing crisis. And now because of those failures, he's in charge of law and order. And then he's got a public safety minister who doesn't even know what a gun license is. So how can he fight gun crime? The incompetence that you have to have as a prime minister to name such terrible ministers would be laughable if it weren't so terrifying, because the people behind me today are paying the price for this insanity.
Right. Hey, is this a country in collapse, in free fall, or what? So why would Pierre Poilievre, and I ask you this, dear viewer, and Doug Ford, why would Pierre Poilievre want to be co-opted by a government that's failing in every respect? We have a failing justice system. Criminals are doing well under the Carney government. We have a failing economy, potentially a catastrophically failing economy. We have a country that is adrift. And why, oh why, is Mark Carney still enjoying some semblance of a honeymoon from Canadian voters when he has utterly failed to deliver on any of the things he promised that he would deliver on? He has completely failed as a prime minister, and it's only going to get worse. So I ask you again, why would Pierre Poilievre want to be part of that Team Canada? Because it's not Team Canada, it's Team Carney. And that's the team you don't want to be associated with, because it loses every game.
And that is why Conservatives are setting our priorities for the fall session. We want stronger take-home pay that buys more affordable goods, safer communities by locking up criminals, secure borders with immigration that is under control and drugs and guns kept out of our country, and a self-reliant Canada that produces more of its own goods and reaches overseas markets so that we're no longer so helplessly reliant on one market. That is our priority. Stronger take-home pay, safer streets, secure borders, a self-reliant Canada. And that is what we will be fighting for in the fall session. But it starts with safety. And that's why today I am announcing a Conservative action plan to counter the Liberal extortion crisis. Number one, we're calling on the government to immediately list the Bishnoi gang as a terrorist organization. The Bishnoi gang has been terrorizing communities, shooting up neighborhoods, extorting our people, and taking the money out of our country. There's evidence now that their violence is linked to terror and to political motivations. This is why numerous mayors and premiers, including Mayor Patrick Brown from Brampton, have called for this group to be listed as a terrorist body. Doing so would allow police to arrest anyone who raises money, organizes, plans, does logistics, or recruitment and put those people in jail, or if they are non-Canadians, kick them out of this country. Next, we are calling for jail and not bail by repealing Liberal Law C-75 and Liberal Law C-5, that we will ensure that offenders who engage in extortion go to jail. They're not automatically released again and again through the revolving door. Finally, we're calling for the adoption of our Deputy Leader Tim Uppal's bill making mandatory prison sentences for extortion. First offense will be minimum 4 years. If it's with a gun, it will be 5 years and up to 7, and it will be an aggravating offense if the extortion involves the use of fire. So this action plan will help us to become more secure.
Isn't that amazing? You would get arrested, charged, and go to jail for criminal offenses under a conservative government? And he doesn't talk about the home invasions here. I'm sure he will. But as it is right now, you're going to jail potentially for defending your home and your family from an intruder. But you got lots of bail for the guy who invaded your home. Yeah, that's the Mark Carney government. What is wrong with this picture? And this is why Pierre Poilievre also made the announcement about arson. Yeah, maybe people should be going to jail for arson instead of being just pretending that it's not really a problem. And, people do this sort of thing because they've had very unhappy upbringings, and you have to understand this. Well, let's go after real criminals and let's leave law-abiding citizens alone. But that's the anarcho-tyranny of this Liberal government. Go after your political opponents. Make the homeowners suffer. But let the real criminals get away with it. Bail and jail. Jail and bail.
I would add Michelle Rempel's bill. She's announcing she's bringing a bill saying that immigration status should not be used by judges to reduce the sentences of convicted criminals. The other day we had a judge who said, well, this individual is a non-Canadian, and if they get a high conviction, they'll be deported from the country. Well, that's what we want. If someone commits a crime when they're here as a visitor, we want them to do a sentence in prison and then get the hell out of Canada. We don't want to keep criminals in our streets. We don't want to invite criminals to our country. Every single criminal who visits our country and is a non-Canadian should be quickly.
Is this a non-brainer or what? Yeah! We don't want the criminals to stay in Canada. We want to deport them. When's the last time you heard a Liberal talk like that?
The Liberals under Mark Carney have lost track of 600 convicted criminals who are wandering our streets committing even more crime. These are not even Canadian citizens. We need to bring back an immigration system that brings in only the right people in the right numbers. People who lawfully enter our country and follow all the rules are welcome to contribute, but only in the numbers we can absorb, and only law-abiding, hardworking people need to be allowed into our country. That is the approach that Conservatives will take. Again, our priorities for the fall. What people are seeing is that Mark Carney, while he made grand promises of change, he's even worse than Justin Trudeau. Under his leadership, our deficit has grown, unemployment is rising, $60 billion of net investment has fled our country. The U.S. tariffs have doubled on Canada, and Carney is now losing a trade war with China. He is clearly failing to live up to the massive promises that he made. And while he gets gushing media coverage for meetings and photo ops and grand announcements that amount to nothing, Mark Carney is one walking, talking, broken promise. And our job in the fall session will be, one, to hold him accountable for the failures that are costing you more, endangering your family and weakening our country. But two, we're not just going to oppose out of control Liberal crime, inflation, immigration, housing costs. We are going to propose real solutions that will mean stronger take-home.
Yes. So if Pierre Poilievre wouldn't be co-opted by Justin Trudeau, why should he or would he be co-opted by Mark Carney, who's worse than Justin Trudeau? So I'm glad to see this. I hope he delivers. I hope he follows through. I'm not here to be a propagandist for Pierre Poilievre, but what he's saying is right. He needs to follow it up with actions. He cannot be co-opted by the Carney government, because the Carney government is a disaster. Now, when I come back, I've got a real treat for you. You know Cracker Barrel? This is a fascinating look at how political correctness continues to thwart what people really want. I'll be back after this message from our store. Thank you for visiting our store. Thank you for so many who have patronized it lately. And I've got an email to get out to some of you who have really gone way above the call of duty. And I thank you for that. But here's a great little piece here. And I wanted to show this to you. Okay, remember Cracker Barrel? Now, there's the old logo there, and that's literally the age that logo tried to evoke. It's one of the small town guys sitting around the Cracker Barrel. That's what it was all about. And here's the new logo here. How utterly, I don't know, how would you describe it? Absolutely sterile? I don't know. It has absolutely nothing. But of course, they have a new woke CEO, Cracker Barrel CEO, Julie Massino, should face charges of crime against humanity and wokeness jokes. There's on the left there's the picture of the way a Cracker Barrel restaurant used to look. And I used to patronize these during my many trips south for Civil War reenactments. Yeah, it's more than just rustic. It's an atmosphere. Look at this atrocity over here. It looks like what? A prison cafeteria is how I would describe it. A prison cafeteria. Yeah. And there's the guy. And there's good old Jack Posobiec, the person who made the original Cracker Barrel logo versus the person who removed it. There she is. Oh, the woke the woke CEO of Cracker Barrel. Go woke, go broke. Amuse quips. New DEI hires CEO is rebranding Cracker Barrel to decolonize it. What the hell does that mean? Yes, I know what it means, but these people talk in riddles. They talk in nonsense. Her first move was to remove the old-fashioned country gentleman, meant to evoke nostalgia and Americana. Yes, we can't celebrate Americana. We've gone way past this in Canada. We can't even celebrate Canadian heroes because they're villains, according to the Liberals. Donald Trump Jr. says, what the F is wrong with Cracker Barrel? Woke War Room writes, Cracker Barrel's new logo isn't an accident. It's CEO Julie Feiss Massino's project. She scrapped the beloved American aesthetic and replaced it with a sterile, soulless branding. Massino kept a DEI regime that promised to identify, recruit, and advance hires by race, and now faces civil rights complaints from America First Legal. to the EEOC and the Tennessee Attorney General. She should resign and be replaced with leadership that will restore Cracker Barrel's tradition. Yep. That's what you go woke, you go broke. And that, of course, is the message here. That these companies never learn. Remember the fiasco when Bud Light hired Dylan Mulvaney to advertise his project, and the Bud Light tanked. Nobody wanted to drink it anymore because it was identified with Mulvaney. Didn't work. But people don't learn because this shows liberals are not interested in the benefits to consumers or benefits to their company. They're only interested in pushing a political agenda. And everything else will suffer in the interest of promoting that political agenda. And that's what this CEO of Cracker Barrel is demonstrating here. Anyway, had a good time today doing this. Please share this broadcast with your friends and family if we can get those numbers back up. And I appreciate you being here. I'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same place. God bless this country. Godspeed to all of you. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye for now.